AAMC, et cetera, to find ways to connect and have people guide you and help you through this process. Find programs that may be a little bit more willing to accept somebody who doesn't fit their traditional profile of resident or faculty member. Find somebody who's willing and able to navigate the space with you and connect you with mentors at programs. But it is a harsh reality. I went to a AAMC conference just a little bit before the pandemic and spoke about some of the work that I do, the LGBT work that I do at UCSF. And some of that work is with a trans faculty member. And this individual came up to me after the meeting and said, I'm so impressed that you do this work and that you have an openly trans faculty member. I don't even feel comfortable coming out as a gay man at my institution. So, you know, I think it's very easy for us to say, go where you're wanted or go where you're accepted. But for a lot of people, there is not a place that exists, unfortunately. And so we need to figure out ways through these national organizations and regional organizations to help people find a place where they belong and where they can thrive.
Just to add to that, Gabe, one thing that might be helpful if you feel like you're someone who's in that boat of having trouble finding out how you're going to fit in or worried about shielding some parts of your identity in your application, have someone who knows you well or you really trust read your application with that in mind once you feel like it's well prepared. Go over your interview questions and things you might get asked about with someone who you trust, who shares your values and also wants to help you match somewhere.
I also think at this talk a few years ago, I believe it was JP who made a comment, and don't quote me on that. He's gone, he's not here anymore. Okay. Where he said something that was really enlightening to me, which was, we all, what is the definition of being true to yourself, right? So I read a residency applicant's personal statement from UCSF who was a student, and he asked me to read his residency personal statement. And it got a little bit uncomfortable very, very fast. Like it was starting to talk about, there was like a talk about like a sex toy and a dildo and like words that were, I think that there were ways that you could still be true to yourself and true to your identity. And I'm not telling anyone not to be themselves, but there's a way to, there's a nuance, I'll use the word nuance. What am I trying to say here? I think that there are ways to present yourself as who you are. And JP used this as an example of, we all have a lot of different identities. And Elaine brought that up too. Like some of us are children of immigrants. Some of us are immigrants themselves. Some of us grew up in different circumstances. There's a way to be true to your identity and still remain, I hate this word, but within the realm of what is professionally acceptable. And you don't have to, you're not selling yourself short if you're not putting it all out there. And I think that's what we talk about with the Twitter or with the social media account, right? Like, what are you going to curate? What's your persona or your perception that you're trying to put out there? And that's something to consider too. You can still be true to yourself in many different ways: your identity, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, your religion, your ethnicity, in certain ways without destroying the entire system before you're in it. What other any other questions or comments? The chat's kind of quiet. Anyone have anything they want to bring up?
I have a question. Sorry. My name is Nat. I'm a rising fourth year at USF in Tampa, Florida, going into OB-GYN for residency. And I have a question regarding letters of recommendation, because I primarily prefer they, them pronouns, but I also accept other pronouns, and I'm okay with my letter writers like using an assortment of pronouns for me, but I'm worried that might come across as like I didn't come out to everyone I asked letters for, or like I'm inconsistent with my identity or something like that. And so I was just wondering if you had any tips for like people who accept multiple pronouns. Should I try to standardize it to just they, them, or if you had any tips on that regard?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think for me, when I was going through letter writing and I wanted to make sure certain things were highlighted, I actually told letter writers about that. And like I was one of those like little nerdy people who like made a packet for each person in like an individualized letter that was like, this is what you've meant to me as a mentor and da da da. And then I was like, these are things that I would hope to highlight in my like in my basically like my recommendation letter. And they all took that very well because like it showed that I was prepared, and it also showed like this is the things that I would like to highlight. Like one of them was the vice dean of Northwestern. And so I had her write one of my letters, and I was like, she will hit the leadership qualities that we've like worked on together. So I think if you want to do that, you can say like, can you mention inside of your letter that like these pronouns were the ones that like I said were acceptable and things like that. And so just like being upfront and clear with them, because then they can actually highlight certain things inside of their letter too. So then it comes across in the way that you want to. That's what I would suggest.
My suggestion would be pick one set of pronouns and ask everyone to be uniform with that, because otherwise, I mean, you have the option of, like Chase is suggesting, asking people to kind of highlight that they're using pronouns that you're comfortable with and use for yourself. But just how conservative medicine is, even people who are trying to understand non-binary pronouns, the like more than one pronoun is sometimes just blows people's mind. So my suggestion would be pick one set of pronouns for your application so that there's no confusion about whether the letter writer knows you well, knows who you are, knows what pronouns you like to use. That's my suggestion.
I'd also like to just touch on in general what Chase mentioned, which is a lot of strategy just about applying to, I'm happy to talk to anybody about applying to residency in general, not even affiliated with your identity, but I love what he said about creating sort of a packet and curating what you want your letters to say, right? Because it's one thing to just ask somebody, can you write me a letter? But it's another thing to say, this is the impression that I'm trying to give to this program. This is what I'd like you to highlight. I'd like you to highlight this and this person to highlight that. So I think a strategy there and a guide for your letter writers is very important at baseline. Any other questions? Still have a lot of time.
Gabe, can I offer one small suggestion from a more conservative quote unquote specialty in dermatology? Like our interview process is incredibly quick. Like we meet each person for about 7 minutes. And so even as everyone is accepting as they may be, if part of that 7 minutes is spent to clarifying someone's pronouns, then it becomes a distraction and people don't get to know you as a person as much as they would like to. And so I think it certainly it's a preference and it's a choice, but certainly you don't want to create things that will confuse people even more.
Yeah, I think I would like to add to that, think about the specialty you're going into. That's something we always have to keep in mind, because psychiatry, like at UCSF, they'd be like, oh, this is great. Like, let's talk about it and let's talk about like your life and everything. That's a very different narrative. Like psychiatry is focusing on the narrative. So I think what was brought up is like, think about what specialty you're going into, how much time you have for interviews, how fast the person might be, because psychiatry reviews the whole like application overall. And so they'll get to see you, they'll get to see the nuances. Some applications and some specialties will want to screen out very quickly. So just think about that. Like what could be confusing that will catch like the reader and like make them feel offset, or like we'll stop reading your application. You want it to be like seamless for certain things, where psychiatry, you can delve more. So just, I always want to put that caveat to things too.
Dr. Sanchez asked, if you receive inappropriate questions during an interview, when do you report it and to whom should you report? So you should report all inappropriate questions or match violations to the National Residency Match Program. So the NRMP has an anonymous way to report violations. So, and again, questions related to this topic or other topics about having children or having children during residency, or are you married, or, all of, there's a lot of do's and don'ts. Even, are you ranking us number one? Like a program is not allowed to ask you that. A program can tell you anything they want about how they feel about you. I can tell a residency applicant, we love you, you're going to be our number one person, we really hope you come here, blah, 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 but I am not allowed to ask them how they feel about us. So familiarize yourself with the rules, and then you can report all of that anonymously to the NRMP. I don't advise personally about like, cutting off your interview and saying, I'm going to report you for that question, because I think oftentimes a lot of programs have a very large pool of applicants. So, we have average, no, above average. We have 23 residents a year. The largest program has 33 residents per year. And I bring that up because some programs have a very large pool of people who interview you. So you may have, 50 people who are part of an interview pool for a medicine program that has, 70 residents a year. And unfortunately, as somebody who trains people to interview, not everybody follows all the rules. So I would hate for you to like burn down a program or cut a program off entirely because one interviewer asked you an inappropriate question. I think also the what defines inappropriate is runs the gamut, right? So there's something that potentially, a question about your personal relationships, while invasive and rude, maybe a lot different than like a very invasive question about transitioning, for example. And so I think you can decide what, how egregious something is and make a determination about, do you want to bring it up in the moment? Do you want to bring it up with the program director or program coordinator after your interview as a point of clarification? And then do you or do you not want to report it to the NRMP? I think is up to you also. I don't want to create a situation where the NRMP is receiving like hundreds and hundreds of complaints, but if something is inappropriate and the program needs to be warned about that, I think it definitely is worth bringing up to them. What other?
If you, just to add to that, a lot of programs after you interview will send these like post-match surveys, and they don't usually ask you like, oh, was there something like gravely wrong during your interview? But if you, for some reason, didn't feel comfortable reporting it that way, but you did want to have like, now that you've like matched and you can fill out these surveys, you can kind of like put that in. There are avenues for you to kind of like give that feedback directly to the program after the fact. And I think I think out of the surveys I received, I didn't see that many where they specifically asked if anything happened during the interview, but I think one program definitely did. And then the other thing I was going to add is I just want to emphasize again that if if you have any concerns at all, I would like ask around any residents or faculty who might have those identities and just ask how they responded when they were asked inappropriate questions. And then in your preparation, have like come up with a way that you would blanket response questions that are asked, because in the moment, like you're already stressed about the actual interview. If someone were to ask something that makes you feel really uncomfortable or really upset, if you've kind of like mentally prepared yourself to like just say something and move on, that can help protect you and kind of like give you a little bit of an ability to continue with the interview. Because I think it definitely still happens, more so in more conservative specialties.
This panel is always very challenging for me because if an applicant came to me with a match violation or said that a faculty interviewer or a resident interviewer made them uncomfortable, I personally would be mortified and I would try to fix that and figure that out very quickly. But I also will be very transparent with you and tell you that I have friends who are in leadership at other programs who will say that this applicant's a troublemaker and I don't want them to come here. So I try to value being realistic with you, because I travel to meetings, I go to program director meetings, I go to AAMC meetings, and I know what's out there. and so it's unfortunate. So that's what's really challenging about this panel sometimes is I would love to tell you to be yourself, wholeheartedly true to yourself, and everything's going to be okay. But I know that that's not the reality for many people. And so that's why this panel becomes a challenge for me personally, because I hate creating a scenario or an environment where we instill fear in any of you, or we instill this concept of you may have to tailor yourself or not be yourself. And I hate that so much, but I think we all have been through this, and we all know that that's unfortunately the reality that still exists for us as a community still. And so I think we're just trying to have these conversations to just be open and transparent, and just letting all of you know what's out there and what are the potential issues you may have to deal with. One of the questions from Antonio: any tips on figuring out how to figure out which programs to apply to if we are looking for an affirming program? I'm applying to IM and there are so many programs. So if for some of our recent matchees, any chance, I know Reddit was huge this year, so there's a lot of Reddit message boards. I know for anesthesiology, there's a Google Doc that circulates that. Yeah, JP, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Oh no, I didn't want you to stop, please. I could go after you.
So this year there's apparently Reddit, which I don't know how to use and needed to figure out. So I felt like the old APD this year, but Reddit had a huge, oh, they got deleted. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay. So I wonder if it'll make an appearance next year. But I know for certain specialties, there were Google Docs going around and other things that were happening. And I think, like has been mentioned but from our panelists, to rely on maybe people on social media, etc. Chase or Elaine, I think you both matched recently. Either of you? Yeah, there we go. Great.
Yeah. So Twitter actually, like, people were saying, like, what are the accepting programs? And somebody would tweet that, and then other people would respond to it with, like, my program is accepting, these are the things that we've had, these are the, like, issues that we've had, this is how, like, things have gotten better. So people were pretty open about that on Twitter. So I would try to, like, once you're getting closer to match, then like think, or like applying and things like that, try to think about like looking on Twitter, because there actually are some active threads that go on that front. The other thing I did personally, like, okay, so when I was applying for fellowship, I literally typed in like safe cities for Black gay men, and like there was 0 results. It was very rude. And then I was like, okay, so I might have to narrow this a little bit. So I was like, safest cities for LGBTQ Americans. And I also thought to myself, like, where can I go that I know is historically safe, as well as where can I go where I have friends? So like a lot of my friends from undergrad are actually in SF now, or in New York, or back in Boston still. So I thought to myself, like, where do I go that like is a safe zone? So even if my school has some issues, I have people to lean on, and I have outside supports as well. The other thing is, I think for Black physicians, they actually started a group thread, I heard, and they were talking about their own programs and like also things they had heard about other programs. And then mentees and like people who were applying got onto those threads too. So just thinking about that. And then also one thing I always do is I look at the makeup of the like faculty, and I look at the makeup of the residents, and then I see like how many residents actually stayed after, like how many left and like said they were LGBT or URM and they left after, because that's usually a red flag that they couldn't get them to stay for some kind of reason. So thinking about that transition too, of like who comes in as a med student, who stays through residency, who goes from residency to fellowship, who goes from fellowship to faculty. If there's like a thing where you notice it drops off drastically in terms of representation, that's usually a sign that there might be something going on that you might want to look into.
Dr. D'Souza brings up some great points in the chat, so take a look at those. Are there pronoun campaigns? Are there LGBT health conferences? Are there, and even related to race and other identity, are there things happening at institutions? Are they hiring faculty to do work on curriculum and LGBT health? Are they hiring faculty? Following the money is a really great, is the institution investing? And investing can be in people, it can be financial, are they investing in this work? And I think that that's a great way. So thank you, Dr. D'Souza, for bringing that up. JP, you had a comment?
Yeah, no, I love what everyone is sharing, because I totally agree. I always like to remind people, and I think this was probably mentioned before, when I applied to medical school, I was discouraged in being out on my application. And that was just in the year 2000. And there's been great progress over the past 20 years. But I think everyone keeps on stating this, it is a process, and is AKA a game. And you have to think about how to play the game to win. And there's multiple players in the game. I think we like to think it's all about us, but we don't play alone. And the process isn't only there to serve us, right? So, you all are successful in getting through college and succeeding in medical school. and just be mindful of that. The players of the game include program directors, other faculty, and your competitors, other medical students who are competing for a few spots. So you have to be mindful and remind yourself, yes, I want to be who I am, but this is a competition to some extent. The other thing I would just remind people of, because I have seen it go badly for individuals, and I think Chase commented on this, is that don't set yourself up for disappointment. Sometimes we apply to a program because of the name of an institution or because of its location. And we know that it's a homophobic or transphobic climate, or that we might not be in a safe environment. But we want that name, or we want to be in a certain location. And then, I'm contacted afterwards, and people want help and assistance to navigate an unwelcoming residency or fellowship program. And I'll remind people, I'll say, look, you knew what you were stepping into, and you decided to go there because of a name or because of a location. So just be careful, really think through what's most important for you. I think Chase mentioned this very eloquently. And be true to yourself, and don't fall into the trap of selecting a program and then having 3 to 4 to 5 years where you're struggling. Because it's very difficult to switch residency and fellowship programs. And if you don't complete the program, that has significant repercussions. So,
thank you for that. I think you just spoke a little bit more to kind of just how much there is to think about. Nat asked again, with interviews likely being virtual this year, do you have advice for getting a feel for the culture of a program and in an online space? And I think that Dr. D'Souza mentioned that a little bit. Everything is very transparent nowadays. Things used to be pretty secretive, maybe not even purposefully, but now with websites, with social media, with the ability to communicate with others, I think there are so many ways to get an idea of what something might be like, and ask to talk to residents. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'd like to talk to other residents. Is there a queer resident that you can connect me with, a faculty member, et cetera? I think just asking to connect with people is really important. And Dr. Brewster brought up this process where we'll prepare residents for their first job after residency. Many places of employment are more conservative, and I think that is definitely true. Also a plug specifically for Emory, right? I can't speak for all the specialties that you can see there. So I think, and it's really, I'd love to chat about, UCSF. I think we come from a place of privilege on this topic because we are able to, we're in a very friendly environment, but I think Elaine and Chase can probably both say that there's still issues that happen. I think that stuff still goes on even here. And unfortunately, I didn't even get an interview at UCSF when I applied for residency here. So that wasn't even an option for me, right? So depending on how competitive you are and where you went to med school, there's just a lot of things to think about, and a lot of, so you may end up at a place that's not traditionally known as being a powerhouse in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you need to figure out if you're going to be comfortable there. And there are plenty of ways to do that. Any thoughts on whether interviews will be fully virtual again this year? My understanding is that they will, and I am, based on program director meetings that I have been to, I don't know if interviews will ever return to in-person again. I think that there is a thought of maybe maintaining because of the fairness and equity that we've found coming from virtual interviews, especially from a financial perspective. And as students are paying thousands upon thousands of dollars and potentially applying to 50 or 60 programs, that financially traveling for interviews is impossible. So one thing that we've talked about is maintaining virtual interviewing and then hosting maybe 3 or 4 on-campus sessions that don't impact, your attendance does not impact your ability to match. So you don't have to come to them. And if you want to come visit the program, you can do that. Those are some things that are going around that people have been chatting about. But I would be surprised if interviews return to in-person this year, or potentially ever. Anyone else want to unmute themselves or put a question in the chat?
Just for Matt's question, this year, at least for EM, there were a number of programs, including ours, who did like extra diversity or affinity identity related chats, and we got really good feedback that was very helpful for people in seeing kind of what we had to offer, but also areas of improvement, because residents could be honest, and they were a lot more intimate than and informal than the actual interview day, where you might have just like whatever residents were free that day, not necessarily representing the identities that the applicants might have. So I feel like that'll definitely happen again. This year there was like a national calendar, and through our national societies as well, lots of advertising on those, and I highly recommend those. I think from the people I heard, those were more helpful than some of the interview sessions and interview dinners.
Thank you.
I really want to thank Dr. D'Souza and Dr. Brewster for their comments in the chat. So please take a look at those, because I think that they offer an excellent perspective on things and can speak about their institution specifically. So thank you for that. And thanks to our panelists. Thanks for joining. These are some resources that we put together. Our email addresses are here. BenGAP, obviously, the GLMA, MSPA, SNMA, a lot of these organizations have ways for you to connect with people who maybe share other intersectional identities with you, and then also your queer identity. The AMA has we know the AMA is problematic on its own, but everything has issues, but we list these just for you to try to find help. I know that the American Society of Anesthesiologists has an LGBTQ plus caucus at their meetings. So, different specialties have different sections that are able to help and connect you with other queer people who can help you navigate this. And local institutions, and going back again to people like Dr. D'Souza and Dr. Brewster, who are able there to help you, reaching out to check about climate, what resource centers are there, and then social media. I think the ability for social media to help people has been pretty outstanding. So just keep an eye on those. And thanks again to Nelson for including us this year, and hopefully we can continue to come. And I'd love to hear from any of you. Just drop us an email. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you, Dr. Sarah, for organizing, and thank you to the co-panelists. I think this is a very valuable resource for our trainees who are applying to residency or fellowship, and a lot of the lessons learned are applicable to when they apply for a faculty position in their coming professional career. So thank you again. So we will take a short bio break. The next two sessions, and I apologize, I try not to schedule concurrent sessions with similar themes, but Dr. Karoglian had to move to a Saturday, couldn't do this on a Thursday or Friday. So the next two sessions both revolve around transgender care. So the first one will remain in this room. Dr. Bellis will lead a presentation titled When Parents Disagree.